Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the official episode 2, even though we're in about 57, of Asymmetric Habits, the broadcast here with myself, Jerry Hanley of Viking Performance Training, and of course, Jonathan Pishner, Apex Counseling. Again, two bald, two bearded guys who both like to lift weights, both love mental health and self improvement, and thus decided it was only natural that the universe was bringing us together this way to talk about little things you can do for yourself to make bigger changes in your life and just get all around successful, happy, goal driven, you name it. This is about the things that will help you get there. So today's episode is about not feeling any shame over little habits that help. Now, that might seem a little odd in some ways of a topic, but I think this is one of these instances I think almost everybody goes through. Just wanting to start little changes that they believe will help themselves, that might make things easier, but for some reason we talk ourselves into thinking that it's dumb, it's stupid, it'll be embarrassing if somebody finds out that I do this. Like I said, just so many little changes like this, that like just stories we tell ourselves. And this episode is about just do it. Unofficial Viking head.
So yeah, and you probably missed the most common story most people tell themselves, because a lot of times whenever this comes up, and we're kind of looking at behaviors that'll improve people, uh, the statement "I shouldn't need this"
Yeah,
is the most common one. It's not even that I'm worried somebody's going to see me doing it. I shouldn't need it, uh, and sadly, that story gets in the way of all kinds of stuff that can really help people out in terms of really making a lot of useful changes. Because somewhere along the way, and I don't know where everybody gets it from. I think it comes from different places in people's lives, but a lot of people really buy into very easily that somehow there's a trophy for doing things the hardest way possible. Uh, so as an easy example, this comes up a lot whenever we'll say, well, okay, how will you remember this? I'm not sure. Well, because you just set reminders on your phone. Everybody carries a smartphone. You can have an infinite number of reminders, and they'll say, well, I shouldn't need this. I should just be able to remember. Now, if I go play a video game on Xbox and I beat it on hard mode, I get an achievement and 50 gamer points. But in life, like you don't get something for that. There's no prize for like playing it on hard mode. And sadly, a lot of people really encourage themselves to do that for some reason, instead of just embracing stuff that's going to work. So, you'll have to add to my list here. But if I just rattle off the top of my head things that people will come up with the story of, I shouldn't need this. Reminders, whether that comes in the form of post-it notes or smartphone reminders or calendar events or whatever. Easy to make that up for people. The a lot of times people will make up that they shouldn't need, um, to get support from somebody else, whatever that looks like. I mean, fill in the blank for what that looks like. But even just asking for help with chores. Sometimes it's easier to just have your spouse or a child or some other available person to assist. Oh, well, I shouldn't need help. Getting support at work, same thing. There's all kinds of little tiny things that would really add to somebody's life, and they make up that they shouldn't need it. What's the ones that like pop up straight for you immediately?
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a lifelong do things the hard way guy, and it's like
Have you got a trophy yet? Did you get an achievement?
I bought my own. I, I bought my own trophies, like they're right here. Somebody. Um, but no, yeah. So I mean, this is something that yeah, it literally took me almost my whole life to finally start. I'm not even going to say letting go of, but just like choosing to do it when it was actually not going to get in the way of, of what I was doing. um, yeah, because it for me it was yeah, like there was a definite actual thought for a long time that doing things the hard way would for some reason make it better, or I mean, and or even me, quote unquote, better than if I did it another way. Um, And there's also a part of it that felt like I was preparing for some possible physical worst case scenario. Like if I do things like the most basic foundational way now instead of using any way to make it easier that exists, if this thing happens in the future, I will be better prepared. And that's one of those dangerous things almost where like that thought is not inherently false, but it's just eventually you hopefully figure out it's so unlikely.
Mhm.
And at the same time, most things you might think about that, you actually would probably be fine if that did happen, even if you hadn't like practiced or prepared it, just through a natural like doing stuff through life and being able to kind of like make those things happen. So
Yeah.
I always would do the hard thing. And for me, a big one that we talked about a lot is reminders. Just like you said, like that's a big one. Um, and the reason that's so important is there's so much bandwidth that those things try to take up, and let's be honest, like people, ours, like you and me too. That like this isn't everybody and everybody else thing. Like all of us generally have less attention span power now than like people used to back in the day or something like that,
Mhm.
because we're allowed to in a sense because we have so many things that are more instant that happen all the time. And so it's no surprise that it can get harder to remember to do things or stay on track, stay with a routine longer. Because I said everything is honestly the deck is stacked against us with that. Like
Mhm.
it's stacked for that easy automation. So when we actually embrace the positives of it, and then so we don't have to waste energy, hopefully trying to remember something, then we can focus that energy on things that matter more and not have any stress about whether or not other things are going to get done. For me, that's the
Yeah.
biggest one. Yeah, because like it's just reminders of getting stuff done, not having to think about it, not having to constantly remember, because then it just feels like I'm in a loop. I'm just in a
Mhm.
circle that never ends.
So now here's the thing I've observed. Like if somebody starts to feel shame over some kind of habit that would be helpful to them, almost always they're comparing themselves to someone. And despite what pop culture psychology will like tell you, it's not always necessarily apparent. Certainly that's like one of the places we can negatively compare ourselves. We do it with our parents, but a lot of times it's to peers, to coworkers. um, I'm trying to think through it and see if I can come up with if there's a pattern. I should have thought about this before we started the episode, but I don't immediately spot sweeping patterns, but I do notice that the people seem to orient to like certain peers. I don't know. Do you see that too? Whenever you're trying to give somebody like a little habit that'll be helpful, and they're like, well, but this insert other person who's kind of a peer. Well, they don't need it. Why should I? Is that
I,
kind of the pattern you spot?
it is, and I would actually add this is also the type of thinking that tends to anchor itself to the exception instead of the rule. Or instead of the average. Like people will pick out the time that they remember when something like this happened or was pointed out, and that's what they end up remembering and thinking they need to do all the time instead of thinking of all the normal patterns. Like so, I'm thinking like if a coach says something about about a way you're doing something wrong,
Mhm.
you think about that one rather than all the times that he didn't mention you were doing things right. Like so a little bit different topic, but just um that type of thought process almost like I'm going to think of that one time rather than all the other times that actually make sense.
So if we put those into more general, it sounds like, oh well, here's this one thing I'm not so good at, therefore I'm deficient and I shouldn't be deficient.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like basing everything off one piece of data rather than kind of all the data almost.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so people very easily orienting towards somehow they're deficient for needing something, which by the way you're not. uh, you got to build around who you are, not who you should be. But a lot of times people will also accidentally mix and match and cherry pick like the best of everyone. So like, okay, I shouldn't need to set reminders because Bob over there has a steel trap memory. I should be like Bob on that. And I also shouldn't need naps because Katie, I mean, she only sleeps 4 hours a night and doesn't need naps. So I definitely, I'm somehow deficient for that. And they'll accidentally look around them, but pick the absolute best person for each of those and do the negative comparison. So, if we really captured the thesis of this, it's going to be to not only do things that are helpful for you, but to work towards being shameless about what works for you.
Such a good
Uh,
word.
yeah. I mean, just being absolutely shameless about it because, as I've aged, I found that if I have the opportunity for a nap in the middle of the day, apparently that's just helpful. Just, I'm not quite 40 years old, but apparently I'm going to be an old man about it and, channel my inner 70-year-old and just like take a nap when I can grab it. Happily, my work allows me to do that because I work for myself, and so I can get away with that. But not everybody has that option. Um, but if I was going to like try and assist somebody in being shameless, you know, the first thing I'm trying to figure out is like, what's led somebody to think that it's so bad to do some small habit. And just for ease of use, let's do the setting reminders one because I found that one common, at least in my work. But just for the rest of the episode, we'll know that we might be talking about a whole slew of other small habits that are helpful to you. But just we'll pick on that example because it's just for ease of use. Um, well, what to your mind would like really get in people's way as they start trying to talk themselves into doing this shamelessly.
A big one that I see, probably the biggest one that I see, is that thought that people eventually tell themselves that they shouldn't do something or it's bad, but almost always because of outside influences. And it's yeah, like peer group is the biggest one that I see. And even if the peer group itself isn't the one doing it, but but by being a part of it, they thus feel like they need to almost have group think, and so if they do something differently than the group of their peers, then that's something that would be seen as weird or
Mm.
something like that. And especially because I'm around so many like younger people, like particularly teenagers, some younger ones, and things in middle school, high school spread like wildfire. And I don't even, I mean, that could be something bad, like an embarrassing story, something like that. But not even that, just something gets popular or some kids start doing something. All of a sudden, within days, that's what everybody's doing. So if something you're trying to do is like different from their actions, their typical habits,
Mhm.
it can be there can be a lot of resistance, both internal and external. And I feel like that internal resistance a lot of times is worried that the external will give you resistance. It's almost like,
Okay, so really just worried about negative judgment from other people.
yeah, exactly. Like that's a huge one. And so I'm talking about younger people with that, but adults are definitely big on that too, especially if you're in a big, if you're in settings with a lot of people, especially if there's a hierarchy, like just a professional one, something like that. I feel like those issues can like grow even stronger, even faster. Like, so
Mhm.
those are the biggest ones that I typically see are worried about that negative judgment, and usually just as being like quirky. Like a lot of times it's not like I think some people might think of it like hear this type of thing and think of it's something actually like bad, but a lot of times it's just being quirky. Like there's a lot of human nature that's worried about being seen as quirky. It's like weird. Like when you're young, if you hear about the weird kid, what does that mean? Like that's terrifying, or that's like negative when you're a kid, or at least that's the way it's like portrayed and we think about it, which is ironic that yeah, when you go 30 years later, while it's still not say like everybody, I feel like there's a much bigger percentage of adults who are like yeah, being weird is cool. Like, being weird is awesome. I feel like there is a greater embrace of that uniqueness when you're an adult, whereas when you're a kid, I mean, like, yeah, I know you can probably explain that part better. Just that like acceptance, where you fit in, and everything makes differences very intricate and possibly like worrisome.
Yeah, well, and so notice what we're really talking about here. We're really talking about what does a person tell themselves? What's the story they tell themselves about, their habit that would be helpful to them? Uh, there was a great line from a movie. A person said, "I'm not crazy, I'm eccentric," which was a funny throwaway line for the movie, but in a way is a capturing of the behavior's the same, but the story the person tells themselves is one that they can appreciate. Like one of the things I didn't realize this until we were talking about it just now. Uh, One of the things that I end up telling myself a lot is that eventually the thing I'm doing, what that's helpful to me is probably going to catch on anyway, whether it's in my lifetime or not. But uh, you know, I carry around a pocket notebook, which used to be super common. It is no longer common. But so I am either a super late adopter or I'm a super early adopter of this technology, of my little pocket notebook. Uh, but that story is much better than the story of like, oh my God, I'm so dumb, I've got to write stuff down.
Mm-hmm.
Now the behavior is exactly the same. But if you tell yourself the story of I'm stupid, I'm deficient, I'm somehow bad, then of course you're not going to want to do it. But so one of the things that I always encourage people to look at when they're feeling shame over a useful habit is this bad story really true? Because for us to declare somebody deficient, I mean, they really have to be at some sort of terrible disadvantage, and they have to be able to not work around it.
Mm-hmm.
But if the workaround helps, I mean, you're not deficient.
Right.
But now, here's what this doesn't help with. This doesn't help with helping a person directly figure out what's the story that's most palatable to them. I realized that I have the early adopter narrative because ages ago, and some people listening to this may not even remember this time. Back when Netflix first went to streaming, uh, I canceled cable basically immediately. I was like, you know what? I don't watch TV enough to bother with the $100 or $150 for cable. I'll pay $10 for Netflix. And now that's common. There's a ton of people who don't have cable packages and they just have their
Right.
streaming services. I did it immediately. And at the time, that was quirky or
Right.
unusual, or people thought it was,
You mean you don't have cable TV? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Everybody thought I was weird for doing it. Uh, but now that kind of fed that narrative, like, well, apparently I'm just an early adopter of stuff because since I did that so early, I'm however many hundreds or thousands of dollars ahead I saved on cable bills uh, from doing that. Now everybody's doing it. Now
Right.
literally everybody, well, okay, not literally everybody, of course, but many people just do their streaming services and don't bother with standard cable.
Yeah. I feel like when you're struggling with whether or not you should do something, and a big part of it is that like and you're can become aware that a big part of it is that you're worried about what others might think, or even what you might think of yourself. It's I think you hit a big one there. There's a lot of people in the similar situation, even if you're not thinking about it. They might even be thinking of something similar, but it almost needs that early adopter in some way. They don't need it, but if they have it, if they see a first adopter, then
Mhm.
that will automatically make it a little bit easier. But then the key is when, especially if they see a first and second follower, because then at that point they're like, okay, it's not just one crazy guy, it's not just two crazy guys. There are actually people starting to get into this. Because like from early on, you thinking of that. One of the ones I was thinking about is a good example is people who try to make healthy changes, like whether it's eating better or just starting to get little bits of exercise here and there. A really common one, a really effective one, especially for people starting at a pretty, like, say, lower baseline fitness, they just want to start moving more, is take a walk at work or take a walk at lunch during work, like really effective, no equipment necessary, something like that. There's a lot of people out there who if you talk to like actually like they feel a little bit like embarrassed by doing something like that because there might not be a lot of other people there that do that. There might not be a lot of other people in the job who take their
Mhm.
health as seriously. Like, and they worry about what that will look like. I actually, one of my really good friends, for example, got used to take, like, I mean, my friend's wife used to take like a big huge water jug, like 64 ounces or maybe even a gallon, to her work every day. She got shamed into not doing it. Like, so she actually, I mean, yeah, so in her case, the judgment from her workers was intense enough where she decided
Mm.
not to take water because of that. And I said, so that, like, anti some positive change bias can be pretty real, and it can be hard to do that. Like, I'm thinking, like, for example, if you've been around Ruby, anytime during the day, but especially when it's nicer out, there's almost always a group of, just health professionals, nurses, whatever, maybe walking around during lunchtime. And you got to think, like, at some point in time, that might have just been one, or there might be other people there wanting to do the same thing, but they can't get themselves to go because they're worried about what people will think about them.
Well, so you've suggested a useful thing for somebody to pre-plan for. So let's say somebody knows that they have a good small change they can make that's going to provide big benefits, but they don't want to because of outside negative judgment. Instead of just deciding not to make the change, what you're suggesting, and I think you're right, is what if somebody plans for how are they going to handle this criticism, whether it's spoken aloud or just kind of nonverbal criticism? Because oftentimes, if a person has a plan for how they're going to do that, it's much more palatable. Even if that plan is ridiculously simple, like just ignore it. Because one of the things that happens when you have a plan, a preset idea of how you're going to handle something, is it removes the biggest fear that human beings have. Biggest fear human beings have is the unknown. And so if you pre-program, like, okay, if my coworkers do this, then I'm going to deliberately just ignore what they're doing when they criticize me. That sounds banal and really overly simplistic. And yet, psychologically within the brain, what happens is you're not fearing, oh my God, what's going to happen? You're saying, here's what's going to happen. I know I'm going to receive criticism, and here's what I'm going to do. So even though the criticism still exists, and that can be uncomfortable, the most terrifying fear to most humans is the unknown, and you've at least removed that. You've removed one of the barriers. So, for the person who has identified, here's the thing that would be helpful that I am really scared of implementing it for the criticism reason. You can take a lot of the edge off of that by at least planning how you will handle the criticism. It will not make your coworkers not criticize you or your peers or your family or whomever, and it will not make the criticism comfortable. But it will take that background section where you're fearing the unknown, and it will at least eliminate that and take a ton of the weight off.
Yes. So, one question for you when it comes to putting this into practice, I'd like to know is, what do you think would be good advice for people, when they had the changes that they want to make, these little habits they want to implement, but they are getting some that resistance. It's just uncomfortable. Again, like, they feel good, but they're just still uncomfortable. Be it being that they're doing it either to themselves or because of other people. Either way, but you and I have talked about before how it can be harder to remember the importance of what we want later on, like why we're doing something. But just tools to remember those things, to so that can help you effectively, like, stick with something, to stick with one of these new habits until you actually start seeing the benefit that you're looking for.
Uh, there's a few ways, and you can make it as formal or informal as you want. But if you're trying to keep something top of mind, uh, you can do it just kind of like internally, meditation style. So let's say, okay, I know I'm going to go with the coworker with the jug of water. That's a perfect one, or the friend. I mean. So we have somebody that wants to do the gallon jug, and they want to keep in mind why they are doing this and why they are going to tolerate the criticism. It can be as simple as before I go into work, like, okay, I know my coworkers are going to be shitty about this with me. However, I know how much better I feel when I do this, so I'm going to trade feeling good for receiving some criticism from coworkers. It can be as simple as that. Just a quick priming. Just do it formally right before you walk in the office. And some people, that's all they need. Now, some people, when those feelings are stronger, sometimes need a more elaborate script. I helped somebody create the other day, yesterday, I think, a much more elaborate script that was written that could be just held in the hand. And it was something to do with some family stuff, and they wanted to make some changes and set some boundaries. And it was things like, is there a way I can explain this to my family that they'll understand? No. Is there anything I can do to make them happy with what I'm about to do? No. And I mean, just literally, like, we walk through it multiple times a day if necessary. Like, they see somebody, send them a text message having a problem with it, break out the script, just and go through it. But always with in mind, like, okay, my habit change is in service of how much better I feel. So that's always part of the script. But I mean, if you got to keep it written, if you have to, heck, if you got to get technological about it, you can be as elaborate as set it up to be emailed repeatedly into your inbox multiple times a day. Like, and what's funny is, like, what we're actually talking about is a potential one of those small habits that people would say to themselves, like, oh, this is so dumb. Why do I need to read a thought script to, like, be okay? Well, who gives a damn? If it helps you be okay, then terrific.
Right. And I mean, right there is the whole point of this episode. Who cares if it works? Like, if it works and it helps, do it. So with these, like, a lot of times when we do that, like, I feel like this one will hit more for the people who thinks doing something is stupid, for example, or trying to stick with it. But for everybody, is okay. You start doing it, you start getting these things into place, but then eventually you hit a point where you don't feel as like you're tired or something, just whatever. But something makes you not want to do it for a little bit. I feel like those points of resistance are when so many people do try to add healthy habits or healthy routines in, and that's when they quit. Is just because they hit that first point where they're, in essence, they hit that point where the motivation to change no longer is the top factor, which is the whole point of motivation. It's not. It's never going to stay number one. So motivation wanes. Other things step in place. Advice to stick with it, and again, make it that habit.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm actually going to curveball it, because I think it's okay for people to fall off a little bit, and let that be the reminder of, oh, right, that's why I do this. I kind of forgot why I
Right.
yeah,
Makes
I
sense.
actually have one I'm going to add back in very soon that I got lazy about, and it was like, I don't know if I need this anymore, and it's getting in the way enough. I'm like, yeah, well, okay, clearly I still need this, so I'm getting ready to add one of my habits back in. I fell off. Life reminded me why I needed it, and it's okay for me to just add it right back in. I think that really that's the barrier people would experience. They would, like, let the habit fall off. And then when life reminded them why they would need it, they would get back into those scripts of, well, yeah, I mean, I was doing so well, I shouldn't need this, dot, dot, dot. So step one would be, if you fall off and life reminds you, okay, fine, just get back to it. But some small habits, if you stop doing them, are destructive enough to your life that you really don't want to forget why you do them, which, okay, fine. In that case, you would at least need to find some way to keep it top of mind. And there's half a dozen ways to do that, but you would almost have to formalize it in some way, almost like I was saying with the other thing, either through reminders, stick it on your calendar, put it in your journal. Um, even if you did something as simple as, let's see, what would be a habit that is tiny but really you should keep? Well, you know what, the water one is actually still a good one, because some people, if they're dehydrated, their decision making just goes in the toilet.
Oh yeah.
So with the water one, I might even just stick it in my calendar. to show up on the first or something. Hey, don't forget, this is why you do this whole water thing. Don't get lazy. Just to remember so that 3 years from now, I don't suddenly, I don't think I need this great big water jug. This is silly. Why do I do this? And maybe you're a nurse or a doctor and you can't really afford to have your decision making impacted at all through being dehydrated. And so, yeah, you just set up some way to make sure it remains top of mind if that's not a skill of yours. Some people just are able to just like stick it in. Oh, here's why I do this, and I never ever forget ever. I'm apparently not one of those people, but some people apparently have that skill.
That is another one of those things that you almost describe to a T what I do. It's like, I schedule myself things to schedule things. I'll go to a date in the future, and especially if it is something that's supposed to be repetitive, I might put it like in that first date in the future, and but then have it specifically written out like and schedule more and schedule later. Or if it's not a date, I'll still it's like not a I want to do this right now thing, but I want to make sure that I do at some point. So let me just flip over to this random to like a few days later and write and schedule myself a note to find out when to do this.
Well, it's funny. I'm actually designing that for myself right now. Yeah, and in service of being shameless about habits that help me. The other day, I realized I'm always like right down to the wire on certain like recurring deadlines. So I'm designing a new calendar for myself, and it'll link to all my other ones. But it's essentially the recurring appointments reminder. And what it will have in there is things like car registration due on this date, car inspection due on this date, this person's contract expires this date, and basically like have all of the things like, and I can look at it and be like, oh, okay, my person's contract expires in 2 weeks. I need to set a meeting to like do the contract update. And at lunch, I was literally taking down everything that needed to go into that calendar, which is already 10 things, and I suspect I'm going to have 30 more by the end of the day.
Right. So another piece here for the listeners, I actually want to like go a little bit more macro. In this one is something you can do to at least remember these little habits. Again, shame or not be damned. Basically, is to, I mean, in essence, remember the why. But again, it's something to actually remind yourself of the why that you chose to do these things, and just find different ways in some way to do this. Like how you and I first came about this topic was actually we were talking a little bit about my bulletin board back home in the office, and yeah. So for the listener, I have in the like bulletin board cork board right in front of my desk, like behind where the computer sits, and on there I have some normal bulletin board stuff, but then I also have reminders that's what the center part is for. So if I simply even just look up, sit up for a second, it's what I'm staring at. And it's both, it's like reminders and mantras, almost you could call them affirmations, if you will. But like one for me is I have a very like strong response to eating it like crazy, like a trigeminal nerve in my brain or something overreacts, makes me really tired when I eat an even moderate sized meal. So I have one of the reminders is do not eat before important plans because it will make that struggle. I mean, just like you mentioned with the nurse or the doctor, like that is a brain fog for me. I do not. So I have an actual reminder. Hey, if you get hungry, wait. Like make sure that like wait until it's a good time for it. And like yeah, like that feels dumb, but it's like no, it's actually been big enough of a thing in my life that I felt that like I'm gonna write this down and literally put it in front of my face.
Mhm.
and
And that's terrific because like how easy would it be to make up in your head that, oh well, I mean, this is an everyday thing, I don't need a reminder of this. Well, apparently you do
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, because when you just think about eating, you don't think about that, and you're like, oh crap. It's like every single time, and it's like, I mean, yeah, that basically that little note is buying me hours and eventually days of like clearer thinking time when I'm actually supposed to have it, and then eating So if I get tired when it doesn't matter as much, then no biggie. Um,
Well,
I mean,
and let me do a one that's similar to that, because so I kind of forgot about this one till you were telling that story. So what do I talk to people all day about? I try and help them think less negatively about their life. Well, one of the things I have on days when I'm just really struggling with that myself, if I can't come up with more useful thinking out of my head, one of my little pocket notebooks is one that just says positive thoughts on the front, and it has different positive thoughts that I've connected with. And if I can't get it out of my head that day, I'll just break it up and like, okay, which one do I need? Oh, that's the one I need today, and it'll help like crack me out of that. Which you would think like all levels of positive thinking would be like super accessible to me, since that's pretty much all I do all day long. Uh, but apparently, some days I just need to go in my little book where I've written them down instead of trying to pull one out of my head.
yeah. Actually, well, on the topic of basically what we do with ourselves, same exact thing with me and working in a gym and training people is I was a workout fanatic for a really long time. Um, and then when career and now the business itself became my top priorities, and thus serving the people that I'm working with became the top priorities. It's just slowly over time, um, well, my fanaticism dropped off in a hurry, but then slowly over time, even just like how much like effort, intensity, consistency I was putting into my own training fell off as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, I came off to, I was like nowhere near the like the fitness level or the strength level, either one. So I can't even use the like, oh, yeah, maybe I'm like not as fit as much, but I'm stronger than I've ever been. I can't use that either. So it's like that fell off, and that's one of those things where there were definitely moments, like several moments of periods of like shame in that, because it's like both for myself, because I knew that I had in essence let myself down for that, and then also because of like what would other people possibly think, because I own this gym and I train people, and I'm not at that point now. So for a very long time, could have basically let like trying to make changes about that, just basically be resistant about doing the little habits that will start getting me back to just where I wanted to be, because of like all those things that might be again construed as like, again, like, oh, he's a phony, he's a fraud, or a kid, like he didn't practice what he preached, something like that. It's like it's none of those things, but those are all the stories that was very easy to tell myself in my head. And then finally, when I was like, okay, hell with it, and made some of the changes, like, well, like one of the big ones, I'm roughly 6 months into my new gym membership.
Yeah, your new gym where you don't own the gym.
Yeah, exactly. That's 2 minutes from home, and like I said, and that's been working great, because I mean, it removed a big part of that. I was like, okay, like I'm not worried about people thinking, oh, why is this guy not working at it in his own gym like that? Again, I was like, oh, because this works out actually so much easier because it's where I live. It's literally across the street. Makes everything about like travel easier. My work, I can focus on just the workout because I'm not in the middle of a bunch of people who I know,
Mm-hmm.
and basically like giving them results. So it's a time period where I can actually take my own training and make it first. And my workouts are like 25 minutes most of the time now. It's like in and out, do that. Like, I might stretch one out to 45 minutes, but much quicker. There was a good chance into by 25 minutes, I would not even have actually started yet if I was working out here.
Right. Yeah, because there's just too much to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Like warming up, but talking with people in between it, things like that.
So one of the things I think I'm going to offer two much more, instead of our personal experience, two things to think about for the person who knows they need to uh, add something in, but they're worried about it either because they're internally ashamed about it, they're worried about what other people are going to think. Um, the nice thing about the internet is it's not too hard to like look up successful people and learn something about their habits. Um, I've got a couple of books that like sort of contain little collections of just different things varying successful people do. And some of the stuff is pretty usual and mundane, but there's an awful lot of them that have really kind of bizarre habits. And I'm prepared to say the word bizarre, in this context, because some of them are like, really, this works for you? I mean, okay, I don't see it, but I mean, if it works, you've got $10 million, so clearly you're doing something right. But it's really not a bad idea if you're really struggling with this. Look up the habits of people that are successful, especially ones you like. If you hate Elon Musk's guts, don't look him up. Look up somebody else. Look up somebody you admire. But you'll kind of see that there's an awful lot of habits that people have that would count as unusual or quirky or weird, but in fact just seemingly work for them. And then the second thing, back to the story you tell yourself, I would encourage people to remember that if you want unusually good results, you oftentimes have to have unusual habits.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So maybe let that be part of the story you tell yourself. Well, okay, I want an unusually better result, so maybe it's okay that this habit is unusual, because if I was doing usual habits, I would get usual results. So it occurred to me that those would be two really good bullet points for like people who are they know they need something, but they would struggle to implement it because of that internal feeling that they shouldn't, or that it's shameful, or that otherwise it's silly that they have to do it.
Yes, and unusual, or even just an unusual amount of time, like could be almost the same thing. Like just being consistent with it, long enough. The 1% rule. If you even at 1% better every day, which 1% honestly even a lot, but even if it's like a tenth of a percent better, whatever, doesn't matter. But as long as you stick with something long enough, so that its effect really gets to compound. Yeah, like it might not be super noticeable early on. It might not even be noticeable within a few weeks, months. I mean, just depends on the type of habit or change you're trying to get to. But at some point down the line, if it's the right type and you stick with it, you'll see the results. I actually saw that in verbal form that I really liked just the other day, and it was something about the results. Even if you don't have above average work or whatever it is you're doing, or if you do it for an above average time, then that can give you those like amazing results you're looking for. And yeah, like a lot of times just don't like that. And when it comes to habit changes, that's a lot of it. A lot of people just don't do it long enough. So yeah, fight that urge to quit. Fight that, or like fight that feeling you have it, and just let yourself keep like giving it on a shot.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Anything else you want to do to wrap up here?
No, I think that covers it. The two bullet points right there at the end are probably the ones for most people to really keep in mind to be the most useful.
Yes, sir. Remember, yeah, like you are unique. Your situation is almost most certainly not. So you'll find other people who struggle with the same things. So I mean, there's no shame in it whatsoever. Just you do you and find the way that makes things better for you. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again for listening. Again, this right now is of course live on Facebook and a few other channels like YouTube and LinkedIn. But again, like these are starting to be released. This will be official episode 2, which I believe will make it the fourth actually published episode on the podcast. That'll make sense if you go check it out as we mix in the newer broadcasts like this one with some of the archived ones for people who do not have access to these calls here on social media to be able to check out, listen to, and hopefully get some help from this. Again, as Asymmetric Habits, again, currently on Spotify podcast and will be coming to other platforms very shortly, as well as its own dedicated YouTube channel. So, all right. Again, everybody have a great rest of your day. And brother, I'll catch you later.
We'll see y'all.